When you have clarity around who you are, how you sound, and who you're trying to reach, the system becomes an accelerator, not a guessing game.
Hit it! That's what I'm talking about. Wait!
Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys.
Welcome to Higher Ed Pulse, your no-fluff guide to artificial intelligence in higher ed. I'm Mallory Willsea, bringing nearly 20 years of edtech and marketing expertise straight to your earbuds. Higher ed leaders are expected to master AI overnight, but let's be real, no one has time to sift through every headline, hot take, or research report. That's why every Monday, I'll break down what actually matters. Fast, clear, and to the point. Want to sound like the smartest person in the room at your next team meeting? You're in the right place. Let's dive in. Welcome back to Higher Ed Pulse. On today's episode, building a GPT is not the hard part anymore, but building one your team trusts is. Kettering University took a brand launch, fed the strategy into a custom GPT, kept training it, and turned it into a working part of the Marcom stack. And today, I'm joined by the team behind that work. Jennifer Umberger is the VP and CMO who led Kettering's recent brand work and helped drive 50% new student enrollment growth in 2 years. Madaus leads content and communications. Dottie Gouine leads digital storytelling across social, video, and visual content. And together, they've spent the last couple years building and refining a custom GPT that supports brand-aligned communications across the team. Kettering team, welcome to the Pulse.
Hi, thank you so much.
Hi, Mallory.
Hey.
I love having so many voices on this Pulse episode. It's so rare I get the pleasure of interviewing 3 people at the same time. But Jen, I gotta say, this is all thanks to having just seen you recently at Cup Wrap. And
Exactly.
what a great conference that was this spring. And Dottie, I finally got to meet you in real life too.
Yeah, it was so nice to meet you, and I absolutely loved your talk. The Pringles can was amazing, brilliant.
I need to just walk around with a Pringles can everywhere I go.
Are you saying that you don't?
Yeah, right. I mean, like, come on, there is one in the pantry right now, but like, chips are my weakness, y'all. Lee, how are we going to get you to a Cup Wrap in the future?
I was there in 23, I
Okay.
think, or 24. And I'm sure I'll be there next year for sure.
I love it.
I was going to say Lee was on hand for actually what started this whole thing. So it was your talk with Jamie Hunt in 2024.
That's right. Yeah, y'all were in the audience, right? And that kind of inspired the work.
Exactly.
There is like nothing more meaningful as a conference presenter. I mean, you know, Jen, you speak at conferences, truly nothing more meaningful than to hear that somebody took your presentation and actually executed on the advice. And that's going to lead us right into our topic of the day. Y'all, most teams don't have an AI problem. They have a discipline problem. I've been saying this for years. The tools are not the constraint. Access isn't the issue. Even experimentation at this point isn't the issue with AI. The gap is what happens after you send the first prompt. Most branded GPTs stall out because they were never built to actually live inside a real workflow. They're fed a few documents, maybe a brand guide, but then they just sit there and the output maybe feels close enough to be tempting, but never strong enough to trust. So I think a lot of teams keep one foot in and one foot out despite the time investment. And honestly, the reason I'm so excited about today's conversation is because Kettering actually did something different. They built their GPT at the exact moment their brand was being defined, when language positioning and audience strategy were still being shaped. Then they kept feeding it. They had discipline, not once, but continuously. Emails, campaigns, publications, podcasts. That changed the role of the system. It stopped being a generator and it started becoming maybe even an extra teammate. So that's the shift a lot of us haven't made yet. We know AI can produce content, but does the team trust what it produces enough to use it without rewriting everything from scratch? And that's what we're going to get into. So everyone listening at this point, Jen, I feel like, has either built a GPT or talked about building one. Please tell me what makes yours actually stick.
Oh my goodness. One of the things that I think we have a distinct advantage of is support from the top. Our president has used chat for a very long time, and has actually encouraged us to do so. When you're at a technological institution, that makes it a little bit easier to be free to experiment with that. And so that really was one of the key things that made sure that we had a good foundation. But trust really comes from that consistent use, as you described, over time. So we're not considering it, something that sits on a shelf and what's in it is in it, and we're just ready to try to use it. We actually embedded it into our work processes. In our even team chats regularly, we're saying, hey, did you bounce this off of, the Bob bot or the brand bot or the whatever? And that gives us a good indication of how we're using it, so that even as we train it, we're also trying to spot the things that maybe there are inconsistencies with, or where we need to spend more of our human time.
You just said something that reminds me of a conversation I had a couple months back on The Pulse with the VP at Clark, who he was building these agentic agents for the advancement side of the house, and was very intentional about giving those agents real human job titles. And you just said, right, brand bot or Baba or whatever there is something very understated about actually naming these things and being able to refer to them in a team call by name, whether it's the title or the cute branded name that you use. And so I love that you did that, because I feel like that probably it helps personify, right, the GPT that you've built. So Lee, I want to know what the inputs were for actually making this work, because I think I've built plenty custom GPT, and I'll admit some of them have died on the vine, and it's because I've only given it maybe a brand guide and I expected magic on the other side that just didn't happen. So talk me through your process of decisioning what inputs to include. And did you include things that maybe would be surprising or that someone just wouldn't naturally think of?
Yeah, I think this is such a new thing. I'm not sure what isn't surprising about it. You know what I mean? Chat is such a fresh thing. We definitely put in the brand guide. I think that's a super important element, but we also put in pieces of content that kind of crystallize our mission. There are moments where Kettering's mission is really clear. So that's like a commencement speech or a convocation speech, maybe even a deck from a board meeting, internal memos, maybe leadership briefings, admissions and enrollment stuff. Maybe even external rankings and announcements are super useful. It's moments where it's saying, hey, this is what we're about. And this is a really clear sense of what we're trying to accomplish as an institution. Because if you can be clear in those prompts, your GPT can be clear in its outputs. But there's also something that is really important that most people miss. And it's that they don't have a content problem. They have a process problem. Ooh, it's kind of what you were saying in your intro.
Yes.
It's not about speed. It's about consistency. It's like in baseball, they don't measure how far someone hits a ball. They measure how often they get on base. So yeah, maybe your ChatGPT isn't saving you time, but it's allowing you to be consistent across the board and continue to create content consistently. And that should really be the goal. If you're just trying to make content fast, you're going to make really, really mediocre content really, really fast. It'll get rejected by your boss and you're going to end up starting over. So what's really saving time in the end? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Wow. So you've mentioned I love that you included the board documents in your list, the leadership briefings, the internal memos. Are you just kind of dropping them in the knowledge base as something new happens? What's the process around that? I'm sure it's somewhat simple, but that's where the discipline comes in, right?
Yeah, I mean, Jen, maybe you'll have a clear sense of what we are allowed and not allowed to put in. That's always kind of a question of what you want to be available to the chat, right?
Absolutely. We try to be a little bit cognizant of things that are competitive advantages for us. So we're really, really careful about any data, any personally identifiable types of things, that is a non-starter. So that does not ever get included. Depending on the memo, depending on the internally facing things, if there are financials in a board deck, I take those out before I load things in. But if there are discussion points from colleagues that can really help to further display what that institutional strategy or specific talking point is that we want to be able to reference in the future, that's how we add it.
Okay, that's great. And I appreciate the clarity around that and the mindfulness of the PII information. That is definitely something that we do not want to miss when we're building these GPTs. Dottie, when did the Kettering team stop treating the GPT as this draft machine and actually start trusting it as a starting point?
So we didn't actually flip a switch overnight. It was more of a steady progression. We really take a trust but verify mindset. And the shift came when the output stopped needing many rewrites and only required refinement. That's when we found ourselves saying, it's 85% there. And instead of treating it like a placeholder, when we had something to rebuild from.
So that makes sense, because I hear teams all the time be like, oh, well, this output is, it's 70% there, it's 80% there, it's 90% there. And I think that helps, because when you're working internally and you're handing content off to each other, actually, I saw this great article once that was you should give feedback as if you're describing the Mona Lisa. And it's the Mona Lisa in stage 1 when we don't know that it's a woman. Or it's in stage 2 when we have an outline, but we're making decision on what color her hair is. Or it's 80% of the way there and we're just adding some shading in here and there. So it feels like that's kind of maybe a similar metric to how you're evaluating the output. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think the true turning point came when the system began to anticipate our intent rather than simply reacting to prompts.
Got it. So wait, how does that happen?
So really, it started feeling less like we're feeding instructions into a machine and more like we're working with a partner who could really read the pitch before the ball was thrown.
Cool. Well, let's get a little more specific. So where are you actually saving some time, Dottie? But without lowering the bar, without being okay with 70% as the output. Give me a few use cases.
So a good example would be, I use it really for a good ideation stepping point. Recently, I'm only 5 years into the higher ed industry. So I'm new, I'm a newbie. So I'm still learning the admissions cycle in detail. And so something that I did recently was I worked with chat and came up with a social media strategy based on the admissions cycle specifically. And so I'm working with our admissions team to kind of build that cycle for specific platforms, for specific audiences, for specific times of the year.
Awesome. Great use case. Lee, do you have some more for me?
I actually have something that's it's a little meta, it's a little self-referential, but in preparation for this podcast, I was able to go through the YouTube channel and find 10 relevant episodes.
Oh my God. Of
get
the Pulse?
all the transcripts from those episodes.
What?
Yes. Oh yeah. And then I drop those transcripts into chat and say, what are 10 questions that I might get asked? And what are 10 responses? But if I would have just read those responses off to you, no one would listen. So that's my starting point. That's like the sketch of the Mona Lisa that I can massage, hopefully, into interesting responses. And that took me less than listening to one half of one episode. Not that I wouldn't love to spend all of my free time listening to the Pulse podcast. I would, in a heartbeat, just like that.
I assume you're playing
so
Pulse
time,
episodes every time you get in the car, Lee, and I will accept no other answer.
In my sleep. Yeah. But I was able to basically get a rundown of what you've talked about, what you haven't talked about. If we want to talk about seeing presenters, typically the first 5 minutes of a presentation at Cup Wrap is me trying to find the presenter's slide deck online so I can copy and paste it and put it in chat. And then I can have an entire bullet list of what they talked about, and I can actually listen to what they're talking about instead of taking notes the whole time. So that's the sort of stuff I like using chat for. to start off with, almost like hacks or cheat codes. And typically I can use those hacks or cheat codes to create good content, not the other way around. You know what I mean? You still have to kind of be the writer. You know, like you were saying, you have to put in the final touches of the Mona Lisa to make it the Mona Lisa.
Okay, so now let's talk about where your custom GPT still breaks. Because like it does, like that's just reality. We'd be foolish if we said it was perfect all the time. Where does that GPT still miss in ways that are maybe frustrating or annoying? And how do you know when to override it versus just refine it? Lee, I'm going to turn that one back to you.
Well, the thing about chat is that it's a product and it's kind of an adversarial relationship with OpenAI. They want you to do your thing as quickly and as cheaply as possible. And that's the actual opposite of what you want to do. You want to make sure that you're squeezing every single piece of information out of your chat as possible. So how do you do that? Because eventually, I don't know if you've noticed this, your chat will just keep telling you the same thing over and over again, or it'll tweak the things that are meaningless to you and leave the things you want to change the same. So how do you fix that? You compile the stuff you like in a separate Word doc or a Google Doc, and then you just start a new chat and you say, hey, this is beige. This is bland. Why is that? And it'll analyze it and give you that analysis. And now you can actually start editing instead of just going back and forth with a computer. You kind of have to work around the fact that OpenAI doesn't care if you fix your problem. They only care if you renew your pro membership, right? So if you can just clear out that chat, take the stuff that you already like from your previous chat, dump it in and say, why is this wrong? Tell me why. That's a better starting point to start improving than just staying in the original chat and typing in all caps, this is wrong, which I have done many, many times.
In those moments of frustration, haven't we all? Like, I don't know if ChatGPT understands when I hit the caps lock, but I do it sometimes. Jen, I'd love your perspective on this too, and in particular around the custom GPT that you built.
Sure. I think as we're working on, say, materials for enrollment or things of that nature, one of the things that Lee and I talked about this week, for example, is some challenges in non-promotional communications pulling too heavily into promotional language. So when we're getting into yield season and wanting to craft a message that, is treating this prospective student like an insider to the institution, we don't need to sell them if they have already put in their deposit in the same way that we need to reinforce that decision. So those types of things, it's not very good at. And Lee, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to pull one of your analogies in here. The thing that it doesn't do well is it is not clever. It is not necessarily artful in how it responds. And so Lee's analogy, which he custom built for you, Mallory, I'll turn it to him so that you can say it, Lee.
Is it the coffee machine one or is
No,
it
the Peloton one?
Oh, right. So yeah, exactly. Right. I cheated a little bit. I've done my homework.
Wow.
So like everybody loves everybody loves the convenience of Peloton, but it's never going to be the same as being in a class with an instructor. Right? Like Peloton's great. It's super convenient and you can do a lot with it, but having the energy of people in a room, having that personal touch, having someone that sees you every week and says, hey, you've been working on this thing. I'm not a cycle person. I'm sorry. I should have. But that's sort of the human element that you're never really going to get from ChatGPT. So I think some of this is also an expectation adjustment exercise where it's just like you have to understand what chat is good at and leverage that. And you have to expect that you're still going to have to be the writer at the end of the day.
Yeah. Ooh, love that analogy. But you're exactly right. I see the same writers, a few times a week. And I know as they're improving, I can call it out. I can hype them up. I can give them tips. And I think this analogy is so spot on. Your Peloton instructor can't watch you. Your ChatGPT GPT only has its limits. Jen, I want to come back to you for a sec because y'all did something bold. You built a version modeled on your president's voice. And I love this use case, but that comes with a different level of risk too. So what made that feel viable and what guardrails did you have to put in place before you trusted it in that context?
Funny enough, in an early conversation with Dr. McMahon 3 years ago, he was showing me how he was using GPT. And then coming back from that cup wrap program, I asked him one day, I said, what would you think about us doing this? Because we had been going back and forth about, how much time or how many different iterations it took to tweak a quote for a press release or, a speech for something. And so I said, what would you think about this? He's like, great, try it. So I think that is the ultimate, endorsement of the ability to do it. And so we grounded it, I think Lee mentioned it earlier, grounded it really in the documented, consistent voice patterns, whether from podcasts that he has been a guest with to things that he's written, different things over the years. And so it really started to understand some of the consistent voice patterns that he had, and not just as an abstraction. The president's voice really has some structure. It has some discipline. He uses vocabulary in a very specific way or a specific tone. And so that's really been difficult to emulate. But if we can, again, be looking for maybe some of those nuances that are more human, that's what we can then spend our time looking for. Again, looking for something that can get 80% of the way and then let us refine from there. As far as guardrails, right now, you're looking at the people that have access to that bot. And so it's not something that we would open to continued use from anybody else.
Yeah, that makes sense. In prep for today, y'all mentioned to me that persona work is also shaping the outputs, which is terrific. But I think that runs a risk that the GPT, and I mean, really all of this runs a risk that the GPT is just going to flatten things. When we know that, and you called this out a few minutes ago, like we know you need to message a little differently depending on the audience that you're speaking to, and a prospective student who's still in discovery mode versus someone who's been accepted and are weeks away from making their decision do require two different types of messages. So how do you address that, right? How do you make sure that the GPT is responding appropriately? Lee, I'll toss it back to you.
I think, again, it's kind of like expectation. You have to expect that chat's going to flatten everything out and do things as efficiently as it can. So I kind of think you want to use it for the right thing. So what Jen was mentioning, like you want to use it to get you 80% of the way there, which I don't know. I feel like 80% of the way there is pretty good. Like I think it's a pretty,
I agree.
I do notice that like sometimes people are upset that their first or second or third or fifth output isn't great, but I think recognizing how fast and how consistent you can get to that 80% point is more powerful than necessarily building the perfect bot. All that time you're going to spend building that bot, you could be spending on learning how to use the bot that you already have to the best of its ability.
Dottie, can you crystallize this into an example?
Yeah, so for us, it comes down to continually reinforcing who we're talking to. We spend a lot of time grounding our work in who our audiences are, reinforcing our darts, our prospective students and their personas, their families, and revisiting those definitions. We go back to that often. The context has got to stay front and center. We don't assume that the tool naturally adapts on its own. So anytime that I start a new chat, I include all of those darts and the personas at the very beginning. So that way it has a fresh reminder of this is who we're talking to.
Yeah, that's really smart. I think it's one of my most annoying things sometimes, even with a custom GPT, but having to re-upload the same documents 10 times when it should just pull it from the knowledge base is still like one of those things that doesn't just seem to work quite right every single time. There's comfort in knowing I'm not the only one there.
Yeah, but that reinforcement is what keeps the output from feeling flat and generic.
Yes, right. It's well worth it to drop those docs in the 10 seconds
Absolutely.
It takes, but it's still annoying though. All right. So as we're kind of winding this down, it's great to build a tool. But if you just build a tool and it sits on a shelf, who really cares, right? So I think adoption of tools tend to fail more than the tools themselves. And really curious, Dottie, like, how did you actually navigate conversations internally to get people to use the thing? And did you experience any resistance?
So I think we're in a really lucky and unique kind of situation. We have a lot of support from Jen, our VP, and from the president. And our institution truly is unique. I know every institution likes to think that they're unique among higher ed institutions. Kettering truly is very unique in our model, our personas, who our students are. We're extremely unique.
Leadership support's critical. It truly is. Like the institutions that do not have top-down support, we can say 3-4 years into all of this, they're not moving as quickly as the institutions that do have top-down support. Lee, you want to jump in on the resistance piece?
Yeah, I found that showing practical fixes is a great inroad. I think people have an apprehension about giving creative control over to a machine. I don't think that's a new thing. A great example, I had to do an OCR scan, which if your listeners aren't familiar, it's basically taking a PDF and scanning it for text and then producing the text from the PDF. So instead of typing out a 20-page doc, I can dump it into chat, get an OCR scan, copy it, and then start editing it or doing whatever I have to do. I was showing a coworker of mine how I was doing that, and she said a phrase that I love hearing, "I didn't know it could do that."
Ooh.
I think that is the moment, if you're having resistance with a team member, if you can get them to say, "I didn't know ChatGPT could do that," you've probably already gotten them, because then the next time they have something they don't know how to do, they're going to say, maybe chat can do that. So instead of trying to jump to the creative element right away, trying to show the practical hacks and fixes of chat and kind of showing how it's a tool that you control, not a tool that controls you, I think is a really great way to start. I don't think there's any great way to get an entire team all at once on board. There's so many variables. Every single chat is unique. Every single use case is unique. But if you can get them just to use it to make their lives easier, you'll be able to get them to use it to make your brand better.
Awesome. So Jen, you're in the CMO seat. What did this force you to define more clearly about your brand than maybe you had previously? Because, once all of this lives in a system, that's where ambiguity is going to start to show up very quickly.
I'm not sure it forced us to really define anything differently than we were equipped with from the brand documentation. I think because we really aligned building this branded GPT along the time frame that we were rolling out that new brand, it essentially took our 180-page brand guide and helped us to operationalize it even more consistently and effectively than I think we could have done on our own. It really helped us to define, I guess you'd call it the sandbox in which we could play and really evolve that content strategy, that voice, so that it didn't start to sound robotic with everybody trying so hard to stay exactly in line with what we had built and built those guidelines for. So it's been such a fun project to be able to iterate over time, and it's done great work for us.
Y'all are clearly building castles in your sandbox. I love it. But the reality is, a lot of listeners don't have a team of 3, like a powerhouse team like I'm talking to right now, or a really clean, fresh brand rollout moment. So if you had to go back, start this over from scratch, what's your advice? What would you do first and what would you avoid? Lee?
I think you have to look at it as something that never ends. There's a phrase, fashion's never finished. You know what I mean? You have to continually return to your chat and you have to continually update it and improve it. Or another analogy is like a garden. You can't just plant things. You have to feed them. You have to prune them. You have to take things away. You have to add things, and you have to make sure that there's not something invading it and killing all of your food, So I think that you can't look at chat as one fix all that you put a brand guide in and it's going to spit out gold no matter what. It's something that you have to work with. It's something that you have to continually improve. And it's something that, most importantly, you have to integrate into your current system.
Dottie, anything to add?
I would say, if anything, just continue to reinforce who you're speaking to, and ensure that your chat is aligned with your brand. When you have clarity around who you are, how you sound, and who you're trying to reach, the system becomes an accelerator, not a guessing game.
Yeah. Great. Well, this was really awesome to have all three of you on. Thank you for walking us through your process, what you've learned over time. And I look forward to, seeing y'all at the next conference and hearing more about how you continue to evolve your use cases. Speaking about the next conference, y'all, if you're listening to this episode the day that it's dropping, Monday, April 20th, this is your last day to submit a proposal to AMA's Higher Education Marketing Symposium. It's in Denver this November, and today's the day. So you've got until the evening to do this. But if you are just even thinking about an idea, hey, why not shoot your shot? Throw a proposal in. I can say on behalf of the program committee, we would love to see some fresh thinking, new ideas. It's not just about AI, it's reputation, communications, brand, enrollment, advancement, whatever your area of expertise. So I hope that we will get to evaluate those proposals and ideally see you in the fall. Y'all, Kettering, this was just too much fun. Half an hour went by way too fast. I bet everybody can find y'all on LinkedIn if they're looking to connect. Is that true?
Absolutely.
Lee, I'm going to miss your metaphors in the next recording. No, seriously, I feel like listeners know I'm a big reality TV person. I feel like I'm sitting in a tribal at Survivor 50 and you're telling me you're giving me all the metaphors right now. It's so good. It's so good. All right, y'all, we will catch you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Higher Ed Pulse. The show is a proud member of the Enrollify Network, home to Higher Ed's largest collection of podcasts. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow, so be sure to check out our other podcasts, webinars, video clips, blogs, and more. Visit enrollify.org and subscribe for all the latest details and content drops directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the digital workforce platform for higher ed. Learn more at element451.com.